Yeah, so basically we're gonna go through, I'm gonna tell you guys a little bit about commons, which are a particular type of DAO. But after that, there will be so many opportunities to participate. And if you wanna talk, just raise your hand. And then your role is to, once you're done saying what you wanna say, you look at somebody else in that gallery view who has their hand raised, and you just call on them. So while you still have your mic on, you go, oh, I see Pax wants to talk. Pax, you go now. Good? Cool. So a commons. Some of you may know this already, but a commons is generally thought of as the cultural and natural resources that are accessible to a whole society or a whole group of people. And there are a few ways to think about these, but I like focusing on public goods because that's usually how we interact with commons today in our governmental structures. And there's this handy dandy little graph showing kind of how private goods, club goods, and public goods and others all line up. But the bottom line is that with public goods, what makes them a public good is that they're non-excludable, which means you can't block anyone from using them very easily. And they're non-rivalrous, which means that if I'm using the public good, it doesn't really diminish it for other people so much. So instead of showing you guys that table, I have a demonstration instead. And hello, I'm an analog girl, so you guys get my nice drawings here. This is a flower. And as a human, oh man, I love flowers. I love them in my house. I love smelling them, but I want to take them home with me, you know? And so I might come in and my relationship to the flower is like, oh yeah, I got my scissors. Oh God, yeah, I'm taking that home with me. So for me, the flower, not really a public good. Maybe it's a club good, maybe it's a private good. But what about a bee? A bee comes to a flower, pollinates it, moves on to the next flower. Well, when the bee is pollinating that flower, it's not taking anything away from other bees. In fact, this bee is designed to be in symbiosis with the species of all the flowers. So, so for bee society, flowers are public goods. For my society, flowers, not so much public goods because we deplete them. That's a little example. I hope it helped you guys. Yeah, so if we have an idea of what public goods are, an idea of what a commons is, which is more about the community that governs the public goods, I'd love to hear from you guys. If you can think of any public goods that you know of in our society today, or they could be fictional or whatever, but I'm going to give you 1 minute just to silently brainstorm. You can jot it down on some notes, but I think it's easier that way to just have a minute to think about, are there any things that you interact with or you know of that you would consider a commons?
Ask people to raise their hand.
Well, I'm giving them 1 minute first.
Okay.
Griff is excited. Okay, so now we had a little minute there. Raise your hand if you've got a commons that you'd like to share the name of. Oh, Grace.
Yeah, so from my perspective, this is incredibly difficult to define, because the only reason that something isn't a commons is that we created an arbitrary law saying it isn't. And also whether something's depletable or not is kind of, even in the case of a flower, very difficult to say, right? If you think about some of the plants that we have, animals eat these nuts and then they poop them, and that's the whole way they reproduce. So it's kind of like, oh, is that non-replenishable? What the heck does that mean? And so, if you say something is not, I would say that fundamentally everything was created as a commons, and we were given the blessing of being born into this world. And then a bunch of humans came around and said, this is mine, and this is mine, and this is mine. But animals don't have anything that's, it's just really, actually anything that's not a commons is our arbitrary decision that we are allowing this thing to be owned. It does seem unfair that I have to pay to go to the beach. Like, who made that beach? Like, that's your beach now? Like, that doesn't actually make sense. So I would say just about everything in some way started naturally as a commons, and we decided it's not.
Cool. Well, I hear the beach for sure is one clear one in there. Oh, I have an anonymous person called User. I'd love to hear from you.
That's actually us. So Grip commented on, and that's such an interesting one to me when we both looked at each other and we're like, well, food is a public good, but no, it's sold. If it's a classic example of the tragedy of the commons, where there's food growing on trees along the sideway. Like Seattle, we planted the whole town with food forests, and there is available there for people to eat. But then everybody thinks it's not theirs and they don't eat it. So there's like this interesting dual thing that goes on with food. And with the beaches, that's regionally relevant, because here in Costa Rica, where we are, the beach are actually public to everybody. And even if you own beachfront property, the first 50 meters are the public land, and anybody can use that and go there. And if you build something in that 50 meters, that means locals can come use it. So it's interesting because some of these public goods are considered a public goods in some parts of the world, and then they've been fully commoditized in other places, or made so you can't actually access it without going through an intermediary.
Sweet. Great point.
Oh, thank you. I see, Grace, your comment. It's the tragedy of privatization. Thank you.
And I see that Adam has his hand raised too.
Yeah, so one of my favorite commons to think about is the knowledge of past generations, because a lot of times we like to privatize our knowledge, the ideas that we come up with, but once we're long gone, it's like, who owns that knowledge? And it's, it seems like that should be, we should try to make that a commons. If it isn't, it seems like it kind of naturally is, but sometimes we try to say, oh no, I own the rights to something that someone 500 years ago created. So that's an interesting one to think about. Oh, do I pass it, or?
Yeah, pass it.
I'm gonna pass it to Pax.
As far as I understand, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give two examples. As far as I understand, due to the hubris of mankind, the entirety of space is a commons, because of the space race and the Cold War, and basically, I think there's an international UN treaty that declares all of space as a commons. So we're doing okay so far. Most of 99 point a lot of nines percent of everything is infinite nines of everything is a commons. So great. Also, when I think about the commons, I usually think about the waterways because I live in Belgrade, Serbia, which has two rivers, and they're not well managed. And as an example of this transition, the commons were very enshrined in the old socialist Yugoslavia, and there was a special form of property called the commons that was not owned by the state, and it was not owned by individuals. And the rivers in this area they transitioned to a state owned model, and then they transitioned to being much more polluted. So when I think about the commons, I think about like the rivers and the waterways that are usually not very well managed.
Mm. Gus?
I have two points to share today. The first one is one that just occurred me today. First thing I think about that as a common, and it's about garbage pollution. I mean, I think also things that are bad for us that we need to put them somewhere else should be also treated as a commons. No, even if it's in if it has a commons goods, it could be a commons liability. But I think also it's important to remind that kind of commons and that we also need to manage those. And the second comment that I've been more thinking about the last couple of months is culture as a commons, okay? More specifically in terms of our mindset, our belief system. And I think about this especially because of the times that we are living somehow, that we are transiting, that we need to shift behavior and mindset because new things are possible right now. And we tackle that only by culture, by cultivating our culture. And we need also a common framework to invest on that cultural capital, whatever it means. Even if it seems like intangible, we need to make that more tangible. Not sure if there is someone else. No one is raising.
Actually, Gus, I wanted to ask you, what was the first commons that you said before culture?
Garbage.
Garbage. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Nice one. Well, I'm happy to.
You're making sound that dirty, Loie.
No, I maybe I am making it sound dirty, but I love trash. I grew up amongst artists that made art out of trash. It's a big part of my family. So it always makes me happy to hear people putting it to the forefront. Garbage. Cool. As long as I didn't miss anybody, my next question for you all is, well, actually, someone's unmuted. Maybe they want to. Okay. What type of parameters or agreements or conditions do you think a commons would need in order to stay sustainable and really be recognized as a commons and work in that way? This is a big question. It's okay to take a minute to think about this one too. But yeah, the question is, what conditions or parameters would we need for, say, food to be a commons, or for the beaches to be a commons, or for the knowledge of past generations to be managed as a sustainable commons, or space? And yeah, I will call on hands as they arise. Frederick?
Yeah, I think that one of the first thing we require is a common agreement. So if something that I think is a common for me is not a common for you, then there's something that breaks. So at least that established understanding that we both agree that something is a common. So I don't know if it's a matter of setting up proper communication between individuals, or I don't know if you can take the commons outside of the community. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Mayor, do you want to talk? Mayor Galmidi? Or, oh, yeah, hey.
Sorry, my mic is muted separately. So I like your point about not being able to have a commons without a community. And I think commons are largely built through a collection of shared experiences, where once you start experiencing things the same way, they naturally become things that you expect in society. And so I think a lot of commons are established through certain shared beliefs where people try to rationalize their experiences together and come to a shared understanding of what they expect the world to act like. And through that, you develop these kind of more socially acknowledged commons, and they become more ingrained in society. Like some older religions would have, a portion of your fields is donated to whoever, you can farm up to 70% of your field in that last corner, leave it for whoever comes by. And that was just to make sure that everyone was always moving and fed. And so I definitely think it's part through that initial shared experience of, oh, I like when this happens. And then that discussion after reflecting on those experiences formalizes them.
Mm. Awesome. Great. I really love that response. Ooh, I have to choose between Adam and Grace because apparently I'm calling on people. Adam.
Oh, so sorry.
No worries.
That's all right. I'll go and then I'll call on Grace after.
There you go.
So yeah, I like what people have been saying about community and like coming to a shared agreement about what it is, what I think a common, this is a commons. Do you also think it's a commons, coming to some agreement and then maybe having a community boundary? But I think that there has to be some education, because I think there's a lot of commons where it really is a commons, but a lot of people that are a part of the commons don't know it. And so like just helping them to know and understand, like, hey, you're a part there, this is a commons and you're actually a part of it. Like, for example, the air that we breathe is a commons, and maybe some people don't realize that, like, what they're doing, what they may be doing is actually affecting other people. Maybe there's some education there. Or like in the flowers example, maybe like my 4-year-old is going around and like picking all the flowers and doesn't realize, hey, there's actually other people that enjoy those. And so like education and just letting people know about the commons, that it exists.
Mm-hmm.
And now I call on Grace.
Yeah, it's interesting that you guys both mentioned flowers, because as an Israeli, people don't pick the flowers because there was an educational campaign, because we had to replant the whole country, and people just don't. They don't. And so that's the first thing, is that there's kind of a social punishment if you break the rules. Like if you saw somebody picking a flower, you'd give them a look, you'd say, we don't pick the flowers here. Like you tell your children not to pick the flowers. So there's, I would say, social consequences of violating the commons are extremely important. And right now we have a society that glorifies the exploitation of others, and glorifies the exploitation of the environment. And so we're actually rewarding people for some of the most egregious behaviors that harm other people. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Like, it's obscene. So punishment for, and social punishment, not like money or anything, just like, really, you're not recycling? Like, everybody recycles. And then the other thing I would say is a lack of scarcity, like a sufficiency, right? Because if somebody's going hungry and there's a field of something that they could pick and sell, they're going hungry. And so there's a sufficiency aspect of it. And in one of you talked about the fields and giving a tithing. And again, in my religion, there's a in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it's very clear, like that you should leave some of the field for the people who just need to come and gather it, so that nobody is so desperate they have to destroy your commons. And so I would say that's another aspect.
Makes me think about interrelating commons and how important the health of one commons is to another, right? Because if we think of, a forest filled with a lot of fruit trees that takes care of the water table underneath the soil really well, we think of that as part of the water table commons. But it's great for the people who are caring for water, but if the food commons isn't considered a commons and people don't have enough food, then they're going to go and take reap all of the fruit from these fruit trees, and then maybe damage the sustenance of this other neighboring commons. So they're interlinked, right? Will?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, like transparency and accountability, like a shared responsibility and understanding what that means within the context of that system, I think is important.
Gus?
Yeah, I have three things. The first one is purpose, like to have really clear what is the common need that is bonding those people onto managing those commons. Second is a method, a methodology, a set of rules, a way in which people need to agree on the way that they will tackle that, they will handle those. And last but not least, I think it's also, there is an important component of consciousness there, about how to motivate individuals to work for the collective and make them realize that working for the collective is also working for themselves, but maybe in the long term. While in the short term, it's about me, you can see that in the long term, if you contribute to the commons instead of putting the soul before that, you will be actually contributing to yourself in the long term if you sacrifice in the short to give to the commons. Consciousness around that concept.
That's great. Thank you. Mayor?
I just wanted to follow up. Grace had made a comment that was really interesting to me about how basically like anything that's not a common is kind of like a gift from society, where you have to exchange something to society to be able to gain that exclusivity. And if you're not balancing enough of the give back for what you're taking from society, then society stops enforcing that this is yours. And so you need to purchase it from society via either like a direct purchase or something far more abstract in how you allow the community to access that thing. I really dug that, Grace.
I'm not sure that I said that.
Well, yeah, with the land saying that, like, you have to leave some of your crop for the people, or they'll just come and take all of the crop. Like, if they're too hungry, they won't respect that it's yours anymore.
Yeah. We're certainly seeing a lot of that these days.
Certainly.
I would love to hear from some of the voices that I don't recognize so much. And I know a few of you raised your hands earlier in the beginning of the call. So I'm going to call on a random person and see if you have something to contribute here. Oh yeah, and the question is, what kind of parameters or agreements or conditions do you think a commons would need to be a commons and to be sustainable? So I'd love to hear from Rafa, if you're around.
Mm. Hey,
Hello.
yes, hi.
Thanks for coming. Do you have
Yeah,
any?
thank you. Yeah, I was actually, I just wanted to say something about that because the last comment about awareness or consciousness that on the long run that bring also something to me. I think that's kind of the key, the kind of mindset we are in nowadays, where if I can see a benefit for myself, I'm not buying into that. So I guess that's one big condition, like the benefit, and then benefit is something it will bring to me and to my family and medium long term. So yeah, that.
That's a great one, and actually, it kind of makes me want to call on Griff because I know that he has some special thoughts about incentives being really key.
I couldn't totally hear what was being said.
Okay, so Rafa said sometimes a missing piece is that you see there's a benefit to you or to your family. And that's something that like each person needs if they're going to be interacting with the commons in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this exactly relates, but I do feel like to want to contribute to the commons, like some people said before, their needs need to be met before they feel like they can contribute. But what I don't understand is why contributing to a commons isn't rewarded. It seems like we have this weird value system where if you contribute to things that are considered commons, then you just get screwed and taken advantage of. And that's sort of ridiculous. And because you're creating value, and if you're creating value, then you should be rewarded. I mean, at least that's the idea of economics that I ascribe to. But for some reason in our societies, we don't have a system that rewards people who contribute to commons. So, but like, I don't know, we're creating economies here. Like this is the crypto space, right? So if someone's creating value, then we should be able to create an economy that recognizes and rewards that value. And I mean, I guess that's why we're here. So
yeah, sweet. Thanks, Griff. Okay, Grace, I want to let you have the last comment here, and then I want to introduce you guys to some principles that we already have to look at. So, Grace, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think this conversation about benefit and rewards is limited in a way that isn't the way that commons have traditionally been done. And like I said, it's about getting the evil eye from your neighbor when you don't recycle. And that's much more important benefit to people. The sense of belonging is a much more important benefit to people than a reward. And all of us on this call know that because nobody's given us a token for showing up here. We just really feel part of this community and it's important to us. And, you know, I don't lose my temper on these calls with you guys, even though I'm very capable of it, because I want to belong to the community. And I think that's so much more of a benefit to most human beings than anything else that, and you can't measure it, and you can't tokenize it, and you can't, like, the most important human values aren't something you can reward. You can only punish them, like, you're out, we're not inviting you anymore. You know, somebody didn't invite me recently to something and they let me know that they didn't invite me to their podcast. And I was like, you know, I was just so distressed. So just, you know, saying that that's the kind of reward and benefit that really impacts people pretty immediately.
That's a great point. And that's why we're here talking about cultural build, right? Because we could be talking tech all day, and I normally do in most of my work at the Commons Stack, but I really wanted to talk about culture and like what it means to be humans in a commons. So I do have yet another analog visual for you guys here. And this is a big poster that we have at the Giveth Commons Stack House of Elinor Ostrom's 8 principles for governing a commons. And I'll bring it closer when we talk about each one. I just want you to see how beautiful it is in whole. Oh, awesome. Yay.
Sam made this for us.
Yeah, props to Sam. Okay, so the first principle that Ostrom identified, can you guys see that okay when I zoom in? Even closer?
Closer, closer.
Oh,
closer,
I'm gonna read it out loud, luckily. So the first principle is that commons need to have clearly defined boundaries. What? Oh.
Just the brightness.
Okay, yeah, principle number 1, commons need to have clearly defined boundaries. And I definitely heard this one reflected in a lot of what y'all were coming up with, especially like the agreements of whose resource is this, what Danny brought up, and I believe maybe Mare was commenting on it as well, about like, if we don't have agreements of where yours ends and mine begins and what is a commons, then really it can end up totally going to waste, which is the horror story of an unsustainable commons. Principle number 2 is they need rules to fit the local circumstances. Well, hopefully you guys can see that. This one is a lot about being, it's a lot about being really fit to what's going on the ground, and that like there's no commons framework we could build that would have the same rules for all commons, right? Like I'm working on developing tools for managing commons, but in no way does that mean that we could have the same rules for all of them. In fact, it's the opposite. It's, you know, we need to enable each community to create their own rules that fit the local circumstances. Principle number 3 is participatory decision-making is critical. So that one I love. I love decision-making processes. I've always been very passionate about them myself. And yeah, again, I heard it from some of you guys as well, in just your reflections and what you came up with what type of agreements we might need. Principle number 4 is that commons must receive legal recognition in the jurisdictions where they operate. So when we talk about commons overlapping with each other or with a wider jurisdiction that may be managed by legal, governmental, or even private influences, a commons needs to gel with those, because if they're not recognized by their the wider world that they're a part of, then they can't really transact well in that. And it actually really relates to the next 2 principles, which are about rules and the enforcement of rules and sanctioning behavior that is harmful to the commons. Because sometimes people need to go outside of the commons to a wider jurisdiction where they can get, further legal help if there's some conflict they couldn't resolve themselves, etc. So principle number 5 is rules are enforced by effective and accountable monitoring. So this one is one that we're definitely hoping to support with what we're building, and much due to really incredible work by Michael Zargum and Block Science in creating tools for really, really robust simulation and just monitoring of complex systems and being able to see those in a dashboard, much the way that an engineer who is building a bus or a bridge would be able to monitor all of the gears and pieces of these things to make sure they have sustained health and get maintenance when they need to. Principle number 6 is that sanctions for violations should be graduated. This one, Grace, you touched on a lot. And I really appreciated what you said about social sanctions, this social enforcement of, it sounded like both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement socially for when someone is following or breaking the rules that are there to keep us all sustainable. Principle number 7 is that conflict resolution should be easily accessible and low cost. This one is very near and dear to my heart. I was a conflict resolution facilitator before I ever found the crypto space, and I always will be. And I think it's the most crucial thing to like our liberation as people. And it's the key to being able to constantly improve ourselves and to be able to have these rules and these participatory decision making and things that legal bodies or agreements that stay alive and moving and aren't just something that generations past decided upon and we can't touch and don't really feel true for us. Conflict is the best opportunity for change on that level because you can see what got broken in the situation in the moment of conflict, and also what was broken before the conflict happened that the conflict shed a light on. So low cost, easily accessible conflict resolution is a really important principle. And the last one from Ostrom is that commons should be in nested ecosystems within larger commons. So we talked about that one a little bit as well. And I dream to see that someday, that, that we'll actually see multiple commons organizing themselves that way, recognizing themselves that way, to the point where they even overlap and flux with each other. So after sharing all of those principles, I guess I'd love to hear from you guys what you think about maybe the way that you see some of the example commons living out those principles, or ways that they get those boxes checked. And I'll just remind you guys, because I took a little notes here, some of the things we came up with brainstorming commons were food, beaches, the knowledge of past generations, space itself, waterways, culture in general, and garbage. So if you guys have any tangible ideas of how you see these principles being enacted in those commons or in any other you came up with. I'm surprised nobody said Wikipedia, because it's a favorite for examples of commons, especially among techies. But yeah, also it's okay to take a minute to think about that one. But whenever I see hands raised, I will call on them.
August is raising his hand with their video.
Ah, okay, August.
How's it going? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Check 1, 2. It's really nice to meet you guys. This is my first event with you guys, but I really love what you guys do. And I've been thinking about this stuff for quite a long time now. One thing or one idea that I had was could you create some type of like reputation or like weight for an individual based on their ability to democratize their decision over time? So basically give them more equity like the rate at which they're able to distribute that equity in like a responsible, mature manner. So it's like the more that you can kind of decentralize yourself, or the more that you can I guess like spread yourself out as far as multiple people being involved in that decision, the more like equity you have in a certain system or common system. That's just one kind of idea or theory that I had. What are your guys' thoughts on something like that?
I love it. If no one else wants to respond, I think that Jeff would be a great person to respond to that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out my mute. Cool. Yeah, actually, this reminds me of something that that Luke Duncan and OneHive are working on. I'm not sure if he's still here, but there's something called Karma DAO, which is an interesting new. I'm not even sure if it's launched yet, but they're planning on using conviction voting as a way to spread issuance of a token. So I kind of think about it like a Care Bear stare. Like if you have 10% of the tokens and I say, delegate my tokens to Pavle and Griff 50-50, then new token issuance will go to those people. So you're kind of like as you say, distributing the governance power in the community through kind of real-time allocation of your trust in the community. So it's really interesting new distribution mechanisms for tokens that kind of follows along that idea, where the more you share, and I mean, it doesn't necessarily accumulate more to you, but I'm sure this kind of idea can create these like mutual trust networks where we can more granularly allocate trust and in the form of tokens. I know that's only where it is in the space so far, but we can kind of create new ways of distributing value and trust and reputation in communities, and I think that's a really, really great idea.
Word.
Thank you. And it's really cool that we have the technology to do that now with like these like dynamic like reputation and kind of trust metrics. So yeah, like we could even have a whole session just talking about things to look for when trying to determine like reputation contributions.
I saw Mir, you did have your hand raised.
Yeah, like I was going to talk about trash initially, but following on like this point of being worth more to have more delegated decisions and not putting as much time into them. It's kind of like proving that you have the ability to adequately assess who you can share your time with, and kind of starting your own firm to make those decisions for you, where you lend your rep to other people to get them the work that they might not otherwise be able to have gotten independently. And therefore you gain some of the benefits that they get from doing the work in exchange for your recommendation or something like that. And then it allows you to then get a reputation for recommending good people who are getting the job done, which allows you to take less effort in the thing. But because you're productive at finding productive people, that increases your value in terms of, no one else has to go looking for that work or that person to fill the decision-making role.
I hear that Danny wants to say something too.
Every single one of these principles, because we're here building communal farms. So we have the bioregion here that we're in, and so the water that comes from the mountains is really important, and where we are accessing that water and whether it's clean at that point or whether we actually have to clean it first. But then within that, we have land bases that have to make, we go back to that image again, and like every single one of these principles is something that's actively being worked right now to make decisions about what do we plant where. So we have the nested ecosystems, the conflict resolution, and figuring out how to have our circles of discussion. Who can access what is actually common spaces? If a boundary is violated, what is it that we're doing in order to help that person understand and grow in that space, and also understand that if they continue violating those boundaries, they need to move out. And so as we're listening to you speak to every single one of these principles. We're implementing sociocracy right now in order to make sure that our participatory decision-making is happening correctly. And we see these things happening on the ground over and over. All of these are challenges that we have, but the tools that actually allow us to manage and to do the effective and accountable rules is what brings us here to be very excited about what's being discussed from the Commons Act. Because it's critical, it's so vital. What food are we putting in what spaces? Who's living where? How are we taking care of each of these things?
Jenny, I think you're the gesturing that's difficult. We're getting a little pew pew from you. Thank you, Danny. Appreciate that. I'm really interested. Doga actually asked a really interesting question in the chat. I was wondering if you would want to talk about that with your voice.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, guys. I'm really happy to join to this call and nice to meet you. I'm following you for a long time. I really appreciate your hard work on these concepts, actually. I'm from Istanbul, Turkey. I'm in ecology groups. And we have some cooperatives around this ecology, and we have our own supply chain from natural grower farmers. And my most biggest challenge is like to explain people about this sociocracy, deciding together, and all the concepts we are talking in decentralized autonomous organizations as governance. And people are not educated in this kind of things. I mean, they don't even know they have right to vote for their own community. They are just talking and talking, and there's no really a structure. I mean, it's like a family company. They are using this kind of things in their community. So there are some structural problems, and I see it's a big education problem here. So people can't accept and can't forget the old and jump into new things and learn about them. So where do you find these educated people to jump into DAO and this kind of governance? And you should be really an individual. Individual is like the root word is like dividable. If you are really not yourself, you are not valuable in your decision. So it's really deep, and I really have problems in the basics. And when I tell them, hey, there's a token to decide and build your community and create your own economy, they are already against some kind of current economy and money. And when you put them a token and they don't get it, I mean, they don't get the values behind it also.
Yeah. Well, I hear a lot of questions there, and I thought it was really interesting that you asked about an individual kind of living under these principles, and maybe you're speaking about just finding other wise people or people that get it. But I mean, I suppose there's a couple ways to respond. One is like I feel sure that there's community in Turkey that are educated and wise about this stuff that you could absolutely be working with. You probably know more of them than I do, but I know that Griff and I have like visited with some blockchain community there, and I don't know, something I would always suggest is reaching to more like direct action, mutual aid, community activism type organizations, because Unfortunately, I think our mindset and like awareness of these things is kind of rare in tech, but it's actually really freaking common in community activism stuff. So finding people that like give out free food to homeless folks and fight for changing laws and you know, build community centers and such. I've found that those communities like share so much more of the values I've found in like the crypto commons wisdom space than like other people in tech, or I don't know, normal people, whatever that is. Yeah, I don't know if that helps. Anyways, we are like at the end of our call time, I suppose. I'd be. It was? Oh, well, I scheduled it for an hour. Okay. Anyways, we can keep talking though if you guys want to. Yeah, I'm just gonna let it be free flow because I was able to share what I wanted to share with you all.
Has anybody oh, could I talk for a second?
You're good.
Has anybody thought of the idea of like a commons like token during like social unrest or during like transitioning times in like a society, like during like protests or something, where this would basically be like a kind of like a community healing resource that we could like deploy for like medical resources, for helping to like de-escalate things, helping to kind of create peace. So almost as like a utility kind of social good framework during like uncertain times. That could be an interesting concept.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's already happening. Honestly, people don't necessarily have the same language that we do, but seriously, I really think that, like, dude, so many people who are fighting to end like racist action in the States right now, they are really, really on the level with all of this. So, dude, talk to people in your town. Like, I bet it's happening. Gus?
Yeah, you're right.
Oh, go ahead. I'm not calling on anyone anymore.
Yeah, no, I just want to share a conversation that I had with some people that are talking about these are old counties from the mid-age here in Spain, okay? That they are also like building their communities around the commons, and their share here is that they told me, look, Goose, humanity have been managing the commons their whole life. You always have like different kind of villages and people managing in their own way, their own commons. But history don't tell you that. Because history has been centralized, command and control, and they told you their side of the story. And when we talk about commons, like this new thing, oh yeah, we can save the world, this is actually things that have been working there for many, many years for certain and close communities that we don't have idea about, but this is something that is already somehow enclosed in our DNA, and we just need to discover that again. And that's the cultural work that I'm starting to believe we all need to focus on, to revive that sentiment of empowered communities that are able to manage their own resources.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
After you.
No. I was going to call on you.
Okay. On that about building up communities who are able to kind of create their own resources, I'm like pretty into the Burning Man culture, and I feel that one of the things that we're currently missing in like this whole great experiment is that it's become too expensive to try new business ideas. And like Burning Man is a cultural experiment on a particular economic policy of, you know, non-spending, non-consumerism, but there should be more events like this that allow people to play with economic models that are maybe different from that. Like, what if you had a festival with UBI built in, so that the more people are selling goods, the more pop in your party is, the more everyone's getting money back from UBI to continue to participate. But when the party's lame, well, hey, we need help cleaning up things, we need help doing this, and you could come get paid for participating and helping out and creating various job markets. I think creating places for people to play with structure, particularly in protest, where you now have these some large unstructured animals happening that seem to be rife for the potential to play and organize. I think that if every night you're coming out to a protest, you should be trying a new organizational structure for how you're guiding that protest along, to figure out how you can better work that model of organization, find out where the flaws are in somewhere that's not so costly to implement. And then you can actually have DAO coffee shops. But nobody's about to drop 100K opening up a coffee shop that they're gonna, distribute with all of their workers through a shared DAO model. You need a place for them to play with the model before they feel comfortable. And I think that we're seeing a certain amount of like unrestfulness. People want these new models. We need to provide them a place to play with the models.
Yeah, I think there are some legal entities that are, or jurisdictions that are starting to open this up. There's like, they call them like, oh, what do they call them? Basically a sandbox, a legal sandbox, where you can, if the UK government agrees that you're doing something cool, like, yeah, there might be some weirdness, we'll just give you a blank check, like on the legal side, and you can try it. And we need more of that. I think there's like 7 or 8 countries, because I'm looking at this for the common stack, right? Because this is exactly the issue that we run into, is that, dude, if we create a token, even if it's non-transferable, and we pull out every, stop that we can to figure out how to say it's not a security, it's a token of value that all of a sudden people will think is a security. So now we have to worry about, we're just trying to help, an open source project find funding, or, it could even be helping the homeless. And because we're worried about potentially creating a security, we can't do it. Like, how crazy is that? We're stopped from helping homeless because we're worried about securities law. That's ridiculous. And but luckily there are some opportunities there. So I want to change. I want to try changing a venue. And I know this is really crazy to do because we'll lose some people. But we're doing it tomorrow. There's this really cool website called Online Town, where it's kind of like, if you ever have done any of these VR rooms where when you get close to people, you can hear them. And then when you walk away, you can't hear them anymore. And so it's like a really cool way to break up into different discussions effortlessly, almost like you're in real life. I really want to try it. Are you guys down to try to move to this Online Town room? It'll be down. Yeah,
I would love to try something like that.
I just put the link in the chat. So let's see if we can move people there. And with enough people, it's really fun, because you can literally just kind of walk around and go from conversation to conversation, like a party. So yeah, well, I'm gonna click that link. Lorelei, maybe you, Lorelei's
I already clicked the link too.
Lorelei's clicking that link. I'll stay in this room
Should I mute
in case
myself?
there's technical issues.
Okay.
You want to close the Zoom?
Do I need to?
Yeah.
Bye bye. See you in Online Town.
Thanks to everyone. If you wouldn't join on the other side.
Please do.
Where's the
We
link
should
to the
talk more.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, there. I see it. Cool. Thank you guys. Good to meet you all.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Danny, are you orange?
If any, fire off If anyone's having trouble getting to Online Town, just give me a heads up.
Yeah.
Hey, Will, it looks like you and I are synced up right now. Because